Okay, hey folks, Mark Locklear here. Going to do a screencast for Chapter 6. Just want to thank everyone for the hard work up to this point. Everyone's doing a good job. You got a few folks who uh, may be in trouble. I think you know who you are. If you have questions, definitely get in contact with me. But for the most part, everyone's getting assignments in on time, and I think the work is improving. So I want to thank you for that and ask you to just keep up the good work. Okay, so chapter 6 is going to be test and debug. So this will be kind of an easy week, but I would encourage you not to let it turn into an easy week and by not only covering chapter 6, but go ahead and get started on chapter 7. Chapter 7 is where we introduce object-oriented programming and really get into the meat of what this course is all about. So for chapter 6, the quiz is going to be due, but there are no chapter assignments that you're going to submit. I would still encourage you to do exercises 6.1 and 6.2, and we're going to kind of work through those here in the screencast. But there are no code assignments to submit. You only have to do the quiz for chapter 6. And so in addition, I put two videos out here. One is first video is a little more concept based, and he just talks about concepts in general for object-oriented programming. And then the second video is one where you're actually writing some code. For most of you, this will be your first time really looking in depth at object-oriented programming. I would encourage you to not get don't be overwhelmed by it. I mean, object-oriented program is one of those things that you really don't have anything else to compare it to, right? I mean, many concepts that we learn, whether it be in school or in life or whatever, you have some other experience to kind of draw off of to compare it to. And object-oriented is one of those. If you've taken any higher level math, maybe the first time, if you have a math background in trigonometry or something like that, maybe the first time you were introduced to a unit circle, or the first time you were introduced to trigonometry in general. A lot of these concepts you don't really have any place to start or any reference point to compare them to. And in many ways, object-oriented programming is that way. I've been really focusing on it for about three or 4 years now, and I'm still in a learning process with regard to it. So it may take a couple of years for it to really sink in before it makes sense. So I would say just sort of sit back and enjoy the process, take in what you can from a conceptual standpoint, and when it comes to the coding exercises, just try and apply conceptually as much as you can to those coding exercises, and just move forward with that. Okay, so again, for chapter 6, you only had the quiz. No code assignments, but again, I would encourage you to read through this introduction to object-oriented document. Mike O'Kane came up with this maybe close to 5 years ago now, and then these two videos will maybe reinforce some of those things, and that'll be a good sort of a good prep for you going into chapter 7. Okay. So let's talk about test and debug. What I've got is a future value application, I think from chapter 5. So this is the book. This is the inside the book examples uh, folder for the course files. Chapter 5, future value, and let's just look at the code so we make sure we understand what's going on here. So this is the standard future value app where you enter a monthly investment, a yearly interest rate, and the number of years. And we are using static methods here. So we've got this calculate future value method, and then we also have get double with ints or get double within range, although we don't use any of these inside this application. The one we'll be focusing on is the calculate future value method. Again, this method accepts three arguments: monthly investment, monthly interest rate, and then the number of months. And then here's our math to calculate that. So before we do anything at all, I'm going to turn the debugger off. Before we do anything at all, let's just run the application, just kind of as a sanity check to make sure it does what we expect it to. So I'm going to enter a monthly investment of $100 a month, a rate of 8% and for 1 year, and then of course it gives me around $1,200 as my future value calculation. So what does testing and debugging do for us? So there's a lot of things that we can do with regard to debugging and testing our applications. Hopefully you know the simplest that we've done up to this point is to add print line statements to our code. And in fact, I think, let's see if we've got one here. So the simplest way to do this, and hopefully you've been doing this up to this point, is just add a print line statement, right? So I'm going to comment this out, and you see here I'm down, just for reference so you can see where I'm at, I'm down in the calculate future value method, and then I've added a print line statement here that just prints out the value of future value each time. And we've done this in previous submissions where we're adding debug information. In fact, I already ran this, and you can see here for each month in the year, in this case it'll be 12, it gives me the value up to the final value that's returned from the method. So adding print line statements is a good way to debug. I'll be honest with you, that's most of what I use. I do most of my software, general software development, in Ruby and Rails, and Rails doesn't have a great ID like Java does, like NetBeans, and so generally when I do debugging, it's just a matter of adding print line statements. There is a debugger for Ruby, but generally I don't use that. I just use print line statements. So let's talk about the debugger, and just for reference, let's look on, I'm going to be talking about page 177. The key things we're going to look at here is kind of at the middle of page 177. Step over, step into, step out, continue, and then finish debugger. Some of your shortcuts may be different. For instance, on mine, F8 is step over, and I think F7 is step into. So depending on the version of NetBeans you got, some of those shortcuts may be keyboard shortcuts might not match up with the actual button. I'll just show you on mine when I run the debugger. I'll show you what each one of mine. So let's just jump right in. Let's say we have this issue of the future value is incorrect, and we're trying to debug that. So the first thing we want to do is come up to our main program and find out where we're calling, where we're getting the future value. In fact, in this case, it's going to be in line 27. So I've got a future value variable, and then I'm calling the calculate future value method. So I'm going to add a debug, add a breakpoint here. What's called in generally when we're talking about debugging, we talk about adding breakpoints. And so if I just click in this left space here, if I just click once, you see it gives me this sort of pink square, and then you notice the line is highlighted. So I've got a breakpoint in place. What's going to happen is wherever I put a breakpoint, when I compile and run this program, it's going to pause at that breakpoint, and then I can start to look at variable information at that point. So let's actually run it now. I've got a breakpoint in place, and let's run this application and kind of walk through some things and see what we see. So I've got the normal I get the normal prompt in the console, so I need to enter some some investment input before we can actually start looking at any variables. So I'll do $100 a month, 8% interest for 1 year. Okay, and then so I need to run that again. Yeah, so the issue I had here is I didn't run it in debug mode. You notice you don't want to hit just compile and run. You want to run it and debug it. So that's what this button does. So again, add your breakpoint, and then make sure you run the debug command in the ID. So let me run that. Let's give it another try. So right off the bat, we notice something different. Notice that we sort of switched to this variable window here, and I notice we don't have any variables yet because we haven't entered any input. So I'm going to go back to the output window. So just so we're clear, notice the variables and output tab here. So I'm going to go to the output tab, and then this is where I'm going to enter my investment information, 8% interest for 1 year. So now notice what happens. Notice that rather than it return the final number, it stops. And then notice also we get this green arrow and this green line here. And that just means that, okay, I've hit the break point and I'm going to pause there. So now a couple of things, and this is kind of the cool part of debugging and using the debugger is, notice I've got this variables window, and what I can do is what I'm seeing here is what the variable values are at the time I hit the breakpoint. Okay, so in this case, my interest rate is going to be 8 here. The variable interest rate has a value of 8. Monthly interest is 100. Of course, the number of years is of 1. Now notice it's also giving me the number of months is 12, and then it's giving me the interest rate here. Now as I start to move through this, so as I start to move through this, I can see these variables change, and we'll see that as we use our step over, step into, step out. So let's go ahead and look at those now. So first, the step over button is the step over button steps through code one statement at a time, but it skips over methods. Now in this case, we don't want to skip over our method because the calculate future value is kind of where all of the logic is happening at. So we actually want to step into that method. So that's what this button does here. This is the down arrow button. Like I said, it may be F7, it's F7 or F8 depending on the version of NetBeans you're using. But I'm going to click this step into button, and then notice what happens. It actually, we jump down to this calculate future value method, and now we're actually inside this method, and we're able to step through sort of step by step. And now we can use this step over button. So that's the one with the little curly arrow. We can use that to step over step by step through each of these lines. Now, so notice what's happening is kind of cool here. As I click through this, notice how our variables are changing down at the bottom here. Again, the 100 is not going to change because that's the initial monthly investment that we set up. But now notice how I is going to change. I is the iterated variable for your for loop, and then also that future value is going to change as we step through. So that's kind of neat to see. So you can imagine a scenario where you have a variable value that's not what you would expect it to be. So this allows you to just sort of step through line by line and watch the variables change, and this can allow you to debug any problems that you've got. You can also use the continue button, and the continue button will kind of fast forward. So rather than step through, we're going to fast forward to the end of the application, and then notice I'm back I'm at the end of the application. I can continue if I like. In fact, let's go ahead and continue. So I'm going to say yes, and let's enter some more information. So now notice I'm back at my breakpoint, my initial breakpoint that I set. And remember I mentioned this step over button. So you can step over that, and then that will is going to move you down. So what we did is actually stepped over the calculate future value method. And in fact, if we go to our variable screen, we can see that rather than going month by month the way we were doing previously, we've already stepped through and moved past that calculate future value method. And in fact, we're back in here, so we can go sort of step by step. And this is kind of neat to see. Again, you can see the data entry sort of change here as you go through these. This string will be built up here, and in fact, if we go here, we should see a string results here. And if we step through, yeah, that's the results here. And I can kind of click on that and get a better view. That doesn't show us a view, but you can sort of see down here how that changes as we step through. And then we can come over here, and again we can just hit the continue button, and that sort of drops us out. And then the only thing I didn't cover was the step out. The step out button. Let's go through that real quick just so we're okay. So again, my breakpoint is in the same spot, so I'm going to hit run. I'm going to enter some information. So, and again, I made the same mistake I did before. I hit the run rather than the debug button, so make sure you hit the debug button. So let's try that again. 8% interest for 1 year, and so notice we stop here. Notice we've stopped here. Now we can do step into, so we'll step into the calculate future value method, and so now we're in here, and we could just sort of step through line by line. And let me go to my variables tab, so we can step through line by line and sort of see these values change. And anytime we want to step out, we can click the step out button, and then that brought us back to the calculate future value method. And then if I continue, we go back here, notice we're back, it's finished calculating, and it's back and asking us if we want to continue or not. And then the only ones we didn't cover is the finish debugger button. That's what this red button does. If you're anywhere in your application, you can click this button and it'll drop you out completely. So that's really all. I'm going to talk about with regard to testing, or well, with regard to uh, debugging. Those are the basics. I would just say that uh, it's 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 somewhat of an art to become proficient using the debugger, but certainly, and then again, this is abroad from a general software development standpoint. You want to be proficient with the IDE and debugger, regardless of what language you're using. Sometimes it may be as simple as using print statements, but again, the more you can use things like breakpoints inside debuggers, it's very helpful. So that's all I've got for chapter 6. Again, I think a lot of this is more from an informational standpoint, so go in and use as much of that as you can. And then the other thing is to start thinking about chapter 7 and introduction to objects and object oriented programming. That's all I've got. Thanks.